All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, March 11th, 2019 meeting of the Planning and Development Committee. We have a quorum. It's 6:50 p.m. So I call the meeting to order. First item of business is approval of regular meeting minutes of February 11th. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or discussion? Then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, we have our minutes. And items for consideration, the first item, item P1, is ordinance 21-0-19, granting a special use to expand a craft alcohol production facility, Sketchbook Brewing Company, at 821-823 Chicago Avenue. The applicant has complied with all zoning requirements and meets all of the standards for a special use for this district. And Alderman Nguyen, do you want to make the motion and your request?
Yes, I move both introduction and I'd like to move also for suspension of the rules. There was no opposition to this expansion. This is an expansion of their tap room and not of their expansion of their production. That happens there, but also elsewhere. So this is an indication of success for our little small brewery there, which is now very, very successful.
Great. Okay, so we have a
Second.
motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a presentation, or would just any?
Well, it'll be nice to have Sketchbook instead of
Sure.
having my teeth worked on. So you're going into the dentist's old space.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice
Just to-
swap out for that space.
Yeah.
To come up and say something, or are we ready to?
We're
I
good.
think we're okay.
Just ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any discussion or questions? Then all in favor of the motion to introduce introduction and action of this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, thank you. Item P2, ordinance 22-0-19 is a special use permit for a planned development at 938 Custer Avenue and an amendment to the zoning map. Plan Commission and staff recommend adoption of the ordinance for approval of the map amendment to rezone from an MUE transitional manufacturing employment district to a mixed-use employment district with a special use for a planned development for 40 single-family attached townhomes in 5 standalone buildings that feature interior courtyards, 2-car attached garages per dwelling unit, and building height of 4 stories. The proposal includes 6 site development allowances. Do I have a motion?
Move introduction.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. And would the applicant like to say a few words to us?
Yes, thank you. My name is Bill Rotolo, and I'm with TWM Consulting, and I represent Crescent Development Partners 2, which is the applicant, and the owner is also here, and that's the Evanston Custer LLC. His name is Kevin Lee. And our entire team is here. I believe you have a very detailed package that staff prepared. So we're not going to summarize that. It would be, just too much time. So I know your time is tight. I did want to mention that we had initially contemplated applying for tax increment financing. We have decided not to pursue that. So I wanted to make that clear for the record. Mm-hmm. We're here for questions. I do have my whole team here, so if you do have any, we're capable of answering them.
Great, thank you.
Our energy consultant unfortunately had another meeting to go to, so he won't be here, but our architect can answer those questions.
Great, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Wilson.
Thank you. And this is more, I guess, of a comment, but early on, there was some consideration and discussion about using the parking lot for an additional building, and that's no longer part of the project. So
That is
as far as, the word out.
Decoupled.
Right. So that's no longer part.
We are complying with your inclusionary housing ordinance.
Yes,
Excellent.
they're going to be paying in the full amount
Yes.
as required per the ordinance.
Correct.
And, this is a challenging parcel, frontage-wise, street-wise, location. So it seems to me to be a good and creative solution and a really good way to put this property to good use. So thanks
Thank
for
you.
that.
Great. Any other comments? All right, we are a quiet group tonight. So then all in favor of the motion to introduce this item to council, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, thank you. All right, now we have item for discussion. This is a discussion of planned benefits for public benefits for planned developments. The Plan Commission and staff recommend amending zoning ordinance section 6-3-6-3, public benefits, to revise the regulations relating to public benefits of planned developments. And we have quite an extensive memo in our packet that talks about some alternative ways of looking at public benefits. And staff, we have a bit of a presentation, do we?
So Scott and I will do this presentation together. We took back the comments that we received in January, and this started with the quite a while ago a discussion of what to do about the public benefits that are currently listed in the ordinance. There's been some concern and thought expressed that some of these may need to be updated and clarified as we've seen additional public benefits. So these are the current public benefits, and this was outlined in the memo. Let's go to the next slide. And there has been a table. It was not in this current packet, but it has been. I think everyone has seen the table that outlines the different public benefits that we've seen over the past few years of projects. Generally, those have been streetscape and infrastructure improvements, things that relate to the transportation and mobility environs, CTA Metra, car share, and vehicle charging stations, public art, and then some other site improvements such as gardens and public parks, and then other things that we've identified as city goals that have been reflected in developments, which are working with employers and hiring local Evanston residents to work on projects.
Yes. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Scott Mangum, Planning and Zoning Manager. So in front of you on this slide, we have a little bit of the recent history on this item. This has been before the Planning Development Committee, for over a year or so, and in various iterations of discussion. But Planning Development did refer a text amendment to the Plan Commission. So Plan Commission looked at this item in November and December of last year, and essentially looked at kind of revising the current system that we have, providing some more guidance as far as what is a public benefit, what is not a public benefit, and some examples regarding those. Based on that, at the Planning Development Committee on January 14th, we presented ordinance 2-0-19 with that revision of the existing text, provides additional guidance on the public benefits. And so this evening, there are a couple of alternatives to take a look at. One of those is the ordinance that was provided previously. Another would be a modification of a system the City of Chicago has been using for the last couple of years. That's the establishment of a Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. I will say this is a very different system than Evanston zoning ordinance currently has, so it would probably take some additional research to go in that direction. But essentially, the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund allows some areas, designated areas around the downtown in Chicago, to essentially buy extra floor area ratio. So make a payment for additional bulk in the building there. And then that's allocated 80% towards a Neighborhood Opportunity Fund that's used in various areas of the city for economic development purposes and challenged areas of the city of Chicago, and then 10% that goes towards landmarks and 10% towards improvements in the local area. So it's another alternative that there was some discussion about at previous meetings. And finally, to establish a public benefits metric. That one of the comments we heard from Planning Development Committee last time was that is beneficial to provide more guidance as far as what is a public benefit and what is not. However, it's still a little nebulous as far as how to weigh those public benefits. So an example of providing metrics is shown here. That would be a certain amount of points allotted for a public benefit that's provided. We haven't gone through and decided points because that would be direction we'd be seeking from the City Council or for planning and development first to go in this direction. But if so, points could be assigned for certain types of improvements, streetscape, infrastructure, public art, et cetera. And then those could be compared versus the site development allowances that are being requested. And those could be assigned point values as well based on how much of a site development's being requested. For example.
So Scott, I'll just jump in. I think the question that came up last time when we discussed this was the degree to which. That was the desire to get more clarity if we were going to go down this route. So I think that these two tables are trying to address that, the degree to which X is done over and above whatever is required or from a public benefit, and then how do you translate that into additional height, additional units, any of those things that are listed here, which are site development allowances.
That's correct. So that would be a numerical system. Montgomery County, Maryland has something somewhat similar that they've done to assign points to benefits. Some other localities have looked at this system and may not have implemented them. And then still others have a straight incentive-based system where for X amount of FAR, you would do Y amount of benefit. Additionally, other comments that came up from aldermen since the last meeting was the idea of creating a alternative fund for green infrastructure or sustainability fund or a green roof fund. And so that's an idea that could work with one of these alternatives here.
Okay, great, thank you. Alderman Rainey.
Yes, I'm familiar with the Chicago idea of buying FAR, paying for it. But I'm not familiar with what comes next. Can that be, is that by right, so to speak? In other words, can the council or the alderman in Chicago say, no, you can't buy it? Or if that's an opportunity given the project, is that absolutely by right, or can it be rejected? You know what I'm saying? I'm not explaining myself maybe, but if it's an opportunity available to the developer, is it by right?
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
To some extent, Alderman Rainey. As I mentioned, the system in Chicago is very different in several ways. But one of those FAR is absolute in Chicago. So within a zoning district, a DX5 zoning district, you're allowed 5.0 FAR, and you cannot go above that. Can't seek a site development allowance for it. So creating the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund allowed a designated amount of FAR that could be purchased in those areas. Now, those are still planned developments that need approval of the City Council. And in Chicago, they're map amendments to a plan development. So you're changing the zoning district from an underlying zoning district to a PD district.
And I did look at the website for this because it's a very intriguing idea, and it talks about that there would be additional public scrutiny. A review process for new projects will also be further refined to foster excellence in design and the inclusion of public amenities. So it sounds as though there would be conversation for additional kinds of benefits possibly. But it's an interesting way to get the conversation going. Alderman Fisk.
Scott, could you go back to the first, I think your first, yeah. Right, yes, right there. So I guess I'm confused about including affordable housing. I mean, that's not a public benefit any longer, it's required.
So the thought here is it'd be
look at it?
something in excess of what the requirement is by code. So if the requirement's to provide 10% of the units on site, that if developer is offering to provide something in excess of that, then there would
Okay.
be points as a public benefit.
Okay.
That the same thing also, for sustainability measures?
Yes, where LEED Silver is required now, it would be something in excess. And again, this is just kind of an initial idea brought forward, and it would have to be fleshed out if this was the direction given.
And tell me about the preservation part of that?
Again, it's another category that they would be providing some sort of preservation. Either the committee or the plan commission have to kind of flesh out the details there, whether that's a dollar amount, whether that's some other way to quantify what would qualify as a point for preservation.
So are you speaking in terms like of adaptive reuse of a historic building, or is that what you're talking about when you talk about preservation?
Yes, presumably it'd be preservation either of a building on the site or in the nearby vicinity of the site.
Okay. We've had conversations up here recently about planned developments, and what I've heard from the public, part of what they're concerned about are the uncertainties regarding planned developments. We hear it, at least I hear it at my ward meetings as well, that the public would like to have a document that they can open and they can be assured of what can go on a particular site, rather than waiting to be surprised when a development application is received. So that brings into the question, and I'm supportive of planned developments and going down that route, but it brings into question education and a community involvement that we need to have in order to make this work, because I think the public is feeling really confused about having what they perceive as a lack of control, or at least a lack of expectation about what a particular development is going to look like.
And maybe partly in response, Alderman Fisk, I guess I would ask a question of us, which is how difficult or how easy do we want to make it for a developer to obtain the site allowances that are in the zoning ordinance and even exceed those maximum site allowances? Are we, because I think the public looks at, to the extent that they read our zoning code, they look at what the basic standard is, and they expect us to, try to have the developers adhere to those basic standards. And then when we allow a site allowance to be granted, or even to exceed a site allowance, then I think that's where a lot of the public confusion comes in. Alderman Fisk?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, as part of the process, we're used to hearing applications and sort of having conversations with why developers have made choices to ask for various variances and allowances. And I think we understand that on a case-by-case basis, but I think that doesn't always get translated on, maybe you have a project, for example, that can't fit some part of the project into a particular site, and so they ask for a variance, and why that happens. And I think that's one of the good things about having a planned development process, rather than just saying you must fit into this shoe size no matter what. But I don't think we're explaining that very well, and I'm not sure that sometimes we don't feel that that's a little bit out of control as well. So it puts us in the position of a yes or no vote, or where I think the conversation needs to be there. I may not be explaining that well, but I know you understand me. So
I think there's always the
we've had
opportunity
these conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's always the opportunity for more education and to better articulate the process.
Alderman Nguyen?
Well, those, I think, I agree with Alderman Fisk. Those are very good points. And I also, I don't know that I've ever raised this on the council, or we've ever talked about it on the council, but I'm an advocate for, I know we have what the zoning permits, and then we have the site development allowances, and I'm an advocate for making the top of that, of the site development allowances, a hard ceiling that nobody ever gets to go through, because no one ever expects, when you read through those, no one ever expects, the regular citizen, no one ever expects anyone to go through that. But lately, we've had developers come in who exceed the development allowance. And so, that would be, for me, sort of a threshold issue of what if we made that a hard ceiling? So then everybody has to work within that. But when I look at so that's one point. I'm going to put that aside, let that rumble along. So when I look at the public benefits metrics, I think, obviously, this needs more fleshing out, because we'd have to decide, well, what would be, infrastructure improvements. An alley might be a certain number of points. If you're going to repave the entire street, that's a whole other set of points. Or sustainability measures, what are the points that we would assign for various things? If someone got to net zero, that would obviously award more points. So I think of that, but I also then think, should we have, then comes the balancing, like in terms of, should we have a certain number of points that every PUD must have? I mean, we say that there must be some public development, a public benefit if you're asking for something. So we have to figure out, okay, so they're asking for this much, and how many points should they earn in order to, public benefit points should they earn in order to get that development, that variance. And then the other point I was thinking of is that usually we want people to provide sort of an assortment, not just a single public benefit, although I think, so it's, you wouldn't necessarily want someone to come get all of their public benefits from a single program or a single item. We really want people to think of an array, I would think, of, so you must have 4 of, you must choose from 4 among this list or something like that. This is just off the top of my head. So it's the idea that it's a matrix, that you really are going to, some of this and a certain amount of that. So it's not just a single type of public benefit that someone could load up all of their points on. I'm not sure that's possible to do, but I suppose if you had a net zero building, that you might load up all your points on that. But so we really want buildings to be balanced in terms of the type of public benefits that they provide.
Okay.
I have to think more about how I would explain that, but.
Right. It's a little hard to be very definitive, since we need a lot more detail to be able to really respond. But Alderman Fisk, are you reaching for your button?
I was reaching. I had a second thought, though, because this may be covered under DAPR. But so public benefits, I'm really interested in the type of materials, the specific design, how it fits into our the fabric of our community, and the contribution that it makes visually. I'm not quite sure how to put that in here. Preservation, I guess, would be the most obvious. But I think this is also a conversation we need to have with the development community as well. We come right up to the line sometimes with what a particular site can accommodate and still be cost effective to the developer. I mean, I don't want to go so far that we're discouraging developers from coming and presenting their ideas, not that we're going to accept them or reject them or whatever, but I'd like to encourage ideas. I'd like to encourage thoughtfulness in design. I just don't want to scare anyone away. So I think we need to make sure that now that our community development staff is expanding, that we get that, the economic side of it as well. What does the development community think about public benefits? How does that affect basically what they're going to design? Do they decide to use a lesser quality of material? Maybe, I mean, all sorts of related things that might save them a little bit of money, but I'm not sure that's where I want to go. I'm very interested in what our community looks like, and that it's something that we're proud of.
I'd like to, I guess, piggyback a bit on what Alderman Nguyen said, because I, too, would fall in the camp of wanting to have to see a really huge number of public benefits to exceed the maximum site allowance. And I think it's sounding as though we would like staff to try to flesh out this a little bit more so we have something more tangible to react to. And so I guess what I would say is the more the project is seeking allowances or to exceed the basic standards in the zoning code, that it would really sort of step up. So let's say if we're talking about, as an example, for height, if the developer wants a 40-foot height increase over the basic 85 feet, let's say, that would be, I'll just start with one public benefit point, but obviously probably want more than that. But if they wanted 40 feet on top of that, they'd have to put in more than just another one public benefit. They'd have to put 2 or 3. And so the more they go up the scale of asking for more allowances, the price would get bigger. There's a good word, compounds, okay. Alderman Rainey.
I think it would be interesting to look at the project that we have before us tonight, which I really like. But it's not a tall project where we get very nervous about. It's a very nice, compact project that is asking for some serious site development allowances that are pretty understandable. You don't have to be an architect or an engineer to understand what these development allowances are. And then look at the public benefits that are being asked for. I think it makes a very good case study when we think about what we're talking about now. It's an interesting model to work from. And I mean, when you're talking about adding 40 feet to a building, I mean, it's interesting, 40 single-family attached townhouse dwelling units where 32 are allowed. I mean, that's kind of significant. And there's some really serious site allowances being asked for here. And I think the public benefits I think they're probably acceptable. But, you know, a lot of the public benefits are really benefiting the project. And I've always thought that it's important that public benefits, and I know about the court cases, that public benefits should really benefit some of the public around the project. And, you know, like they're going to be required to plow the alley behind their building when it snows. I mean, well, that's very nice for them. But what about everybody? So I just think it's interesting to take a look at this project as we talk about these changes.
Yeah, good point. Alderman Nguyen or Alderman Fisk had her light on.
go ahead.
Are you, okay.
I
My light switch doesn't work.
Okay, sorry.
I just wanted to add something to what we were talking about. There are some things that we've discussed over the years at council that are on our wish list, and they have ranged from Trader Joe's to a bowling alley to Northlight to, I mean, you can think of other ones, I'm sure. I'm not sure that they belong in the public benefit category, but they might, and I don't know how you make room for them in here, but you know, it's interesting because in the Northlight project, I mean, we had a developer coming in who was willing to build a vanilla box for Northlight in exchange for, I believe it was a 30-some story building on a block that in my ward, so I paid a lot of attention to that. But it does mean that one of the challenges we have is that if we want to attract these things, these uses that we've paid so much attention to over the years, we're going to have to figure out how to do that and how they're going to offset the development allowances that are applied for, because I'm sure what we're trying to bring in aren't necessarily moneymakers, with the exception of Trader Joe's, but they're not necessarily moneymakers, but they're community value uses, and they are, somehow or another, a developer's going to have to pay for them to be inside of a building that houses something else. And that may, what we hear most often is height. I mean, that's where height goes. And I agree. I would rather our height restrictions and the zoning ordinance be respected, with the understanding that if we're trying to attract some of these things, that may be one place that we have to go. That's why I think it's important to, talk to the development community about them.
Alderman Nguyen.
So I was thinking a little bit more about my matrix idea, and I think talking Alderman Rainey, sort of her comment was sort of crystallized it in the sense of having a balance between both external benefits. So I'd say things that benefit more than just the site, which might be paving a street, which benefits everyone, or a streetscape improvement, or a traffic light, which both helps the impact of whatever the development is, but also helps the community at large. So I probably don't have quite the right labels, but I'm going to call it sort of an external benefit, which looks outward from the project, and then an internal benefit, which would be something like the sustainability measures, or education and employment. Actually, that could go either way, but preservation issues. And having a balance of some sort of those two types of public benefits. So something that both benefits the larger community, as well as something that helps the project work better on that site, or is something that we value, whether it's more open space on a site, or sustainability, or alternative modes of transportation, something like that. So I like that Alderman Rainey's point, though, that I think that public benefits really should be public very broadly, as well as just very specific to the site.
Alderman Fisk.
I'm sorry, this is a really interesting subject.
To the four of us.
Yeah, to the four of us, we really, we really like this. On the Sienna site, years ago, before I was on the council, I remember the discussion that, I don't remember the name of the developer, it's probably a good thing, okay, that one of the public benefits was that he was going to pave Oak Avenue, and that never happened. And so I'm just wondering, when we have public benefits like this, has any thought ever been given to setting aside a fund so that the public benefit part, if it is an infrastructure improvement or something, that the money actually gets set aside so that can be sure to get done?
There are some examples of that for public improvements, or conditions and ordinances. There'll be a one-time payment of X dollar amount for future improvement of a traffic signal. I think I want to say E2 maybe contributed to some traffic signal improvements that are going to be made in the near future.
So in the example of the more recent developments, the developer makes the payment, and then that's how they receive their final certificate of occupancy. So they stay in a temporary certificate of occupancy, or maybe don't even get to that if they haven't fulfilled the requirements of the ordinance.
Right.
Just so I can chime in, that's actually easier on the city from a logistics standpoint, because then we can bid the project, we can wrap it into our other public improvements that are in the near area, and we don't have to force the developer to do it on at that time. We would rather have.
No, I hear you, but the Kendall development is what, 3 years old now? They still have temporary occupancy permits, and they haven't done the improvements. And I'm trying to think of something to do in advance to make sure that those improvements get done. Because now some of those houses are actually even changing hands, and it still is pretty problematic.
Wow. So I'd like to just make sure, so I'm hoping we're giving staff enough direction to come up with another iteration of
Let me
this?
try to summarize
Sure.
a little bit of what I think we want. The direction is to continue down of the three paths, continue down this one
Right,
a little bit
the
further
metric
and
path.
return with some sense of, I think, the compounding concept, some of the other items in terms of where do you incorporate external, internal to the site. Some of I heard Alderman Fisk say the piece of design and desirable uses. How does that get incorporated into these that aren't necessarily defined within these categories? So we can try to noodle on that. I think staff will talk, and we may return with some further direction, almost a prioritization of these public benefits. I think maybe we'll circulate a spreadsheet that we can get some feedback on to what are the priorities. And as we were going through this example, I think the most recent process we went to was the inclusionary housing ordinance. And to glean out what our priorities, we learned over the course of time that on-site units were preferable. So I think if we can get to, from a public benefit category, what are the priorities there, we can better scale and do the math around this. And then at the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance Subcommittee, staff went through a few of the developments and looked at site development allowances so we could kind of check our math on, run it through a process of whether what would be required here and what might that cost, and we can maybe cross-check with some of the developers that operate in the community.
And I also think we could give some real-life examples to Alderman Rainey's point. We could apply some of these so you could see what the implementation would look like.
Okay. And also you're going to assign metrics to these various public benefits, and then also assign some points that need to be earned for various site allowances as well.
Right. So I think our first step will be to circulate a matrix to the council to get a sense of the priority of different public benefits. I recall when we did the downtown plan, there was quite a bit of discussion around how that was a completely different set of codes, but there was a lot of discussion over what was priority and how to accomplish the things that were the goals at the time. How do you accomplish those through public benefits? So we can work through that a little bit, and then the staff has already sort of started to look at how this math would work. We actually have a math major in our staff, so
Okay.
that helps as well.
Great, especially if we're going to be compounding. So on the other category, we talk in the zoning code about the ziggurat setback, but that's not actually in the site allowance section of the code, and so I'd like to have that ziggurat setback reflected in one of the standards that we seek to have observed. Okay. Any other comments or discussion on this item? Yeah, thanks. What was that?
So I think we'll try to shoot for the 8th, but that might be too soon given some additional research, so we would come
Sure.
potentially the second meeting in April.
Great, fine, thank you. So we have one other item for discussion, and I'm not exactly sure what's envisioned in this discussion, so maybe we just sort of get a little bit of a start on it. And this is a request from Alderman Fisk that we discuss the DAPR committee. And Alderman Fisk, do you want to
Sure.
elaborate?
Sure. So this is a reference from me to take a look at the DAPR committee. I think there really is some confusion out in the community about what it is, not only that DAPR does, but their role in the process. And I want to start out by saying that I absolutely support DAPR. It's a committee of staff. It is entirely appropriate and important for us to hear from staff as they look at a new application and review it. Where I have a little bit of a problem is I'm not sure all of the relevant staff is present, and I'm not sure that it doesn't send the wrong message when staff takes a vote up or down on a particular project. So what I'm hoping and what I would like to get presented not only to the public but also the applicant in front of DAPR is that the committee is there to work with them, and that there is going to be a list of findings or recommendations that DAPR makes that follows that project through to the Plan Commission. I've attended a lot of meetings recently, Plan Commission, and it seems to me that they look first at the recommendation from DAPR and then have a very cursory discussion of a project. And that's bothered me because some of these projects are very complicated, and it would, I think, help all of us to better understand not only the decision process, but also the nuances of developments if we dug down a little bit deeper by using the list of recommendations or the list of findings rather than just the up or down voted DAPR. So this was really a reference that to staff to take a look at how DAPR might be more effectively used, because my understanding is that an application comes in, and then as a zoning analysis, our zoning staff sends back a letter to the applicant saying how it does or does not meet zoning, and then goes to DAPR for further comments. One of the issues that I have felt was missing in that discussion was the economic benefit or lack of benefits for particular projects. And I think that's an important part of the discussion. I'd like to see it included in the DAPR conversation. But most importantly, I think voting on something sends the message of we like it, we don't like it, without really a complete a complete discussion, and I think that does everybody a disservice. I think it does us a disservice, I think it does the Plan Commission a disservice, and I think it does the public a disservice. So I would just like staff to be thinking about that.
So is part of your concern that the Plan Commission isn't looking enough in detail at what's coming from DAPR?
My recent experience with the Plan Commission is that they are not digging down into developments. That's a very cursory review. I mean, you've got Plan Commission minutes in here of various developments, and given the amount of time that we spend and that the public spends and developers spend and staff spends, I think it's worth a better discussion. Now, I'm council liaison to the staff committee. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, frankly, with that. But when I sit there and I'm thinking, this is not a complete discussion that's going on. Whether I agree with them or not, that's not the point. The point is that there's sort of staff recommends denial, and so it goes forward like that. It's not, you have not a very good sense of the information that's been transmitted to the applicant or the applicant's responses. You have to really search for that. I just think we need to have a better conversation than we're having.
Okay. Alderman Wilson and then Alderman Nguyen.
Thanks. And I do, Alderman Fisk, I understand the points and the concern, but I think a lot of it maybe is more of an issue with, with the subsequent review as opposed to this particular committee. And, I wouldn't want to put too much. It's already a finite mission. They have a mission to do, the 9 elements that are set forth in the code. So you've got these 9 things that they're doing, and they're really focused on, for the most part, the design aspect of the structure. So to get into things like the economic development and the benefits, those are all certainly they're very, very relevant to any given project. But the design part, when I look at the DAPR, I'm looking for those features, the design features. I don't really want to look at DAPR stuff and say, okay, what about the economic benefits? I want to see, is the engineering well designed? Is the pedestrian functionality there? Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for from that particular committee. And hopefully, and if the Plan Commission's not doing that effectively, we could take that up with them. Personally, I don't necessarily see that is a big problem, but it's not to say that I didn't miss something. So I'm more comfortable leaving the limited mission on this DAPR committee.
Alderman Nguyen.
Well, I do think, Alderman Fisk, I think, and occasionally I have felt that the Plan Commission doesn't dig deeply enough either. And so I think actually the issue is more with the Plan Commission, because I find DAPR, when I review the minutes and the actions that they've taken place, and when I'm there, occasionally, I really appreciate their expertise and the way that they're looking at things. And I'm relying on them for the expertise that each member of the staff brings to that expertise that I don't necessarily have. And so I think perhaps the issue is more, to what extent is the Plan Commission using its own standards and its own expertise to then look at the issue and understanding what its mission is, because I think that they have separate roles in the process. And I think DAPR is continuing to do its job correctly, and it might be the Plan Commission that we need to talk with them and say, we need them perhaps to step up more to be part of the process, because we look, and in the past, we have certainly had very, very strong voiced plan commissions. And we need them to be a stronger voice one way or another, or provide us with more detail or understanding of their thinking in the process, because they're part of this process of review and refinement before it comes to us. And we need them to be more active in the process. But I don't necessarily see it as a DAPR issue. I see it more of as a Plan Commission issue.
And we haven't heard from Alderman Rainey on this yet.
I think you explained that very well, Alderman Nguyen. I think DAPR is the best advice money can buy for the applicant. And that is where DAPR is most effective. DAPR is giving advice not to the Plan Commission. DAPR is giving advice to the applicant. And if the applicant doesn't take that advice and run with it, then shame on them. And I would hope, and I'm sure, some of us don't always do our homework, and maybe they're not always doing their homework. But I agree also with you, Alderman Fisk, in that I don't think DAPR should send a recommendation to the Plan Commission. I think they should send a recommendation to the applicant, which is what they're doing. But I think the Plan Commission is taking it as their recommendation. And perhaps they could do it more segmented, for example, and it's probably in the text. And those of us who go to DAPR more frequently than others, because we're in Evanston during the day, can see how they handle each case. For example, they might love the parking situation and hate the way the water retention is being handled, or the pervious surface is being handled, or something like that. But maybe they need to segment their comments so that the Plan Commission can look at it like that and not see a vote up or down on the entire project. And I know Director Leonard is at every one of those meetings now, and maybe it could be done, maybe in the final analysis, it could be presented to the when it gets to the Plan Commission, it could look a little differently than the way that it comes out, because it is they take it as a recommendation, and I think you're right, because people are saying in the community, the Plan Commission denied it, DAPR denied it, you should deny it. And perhaps when the DAPR denied it, quote unquote denied it, maybe the developer or the applicant did make some changes. I don't know.
Alderman Fisk.
But I think your point is well taken.
Well, thank you, Alderman Rainey. That makes me feel better. Just to emphasize my point, which is something that Alderman Rainey mentioned, is that I believe DAPR provides a absolutely necessary service. I mean, we could not do without them, and I agree that if a developer is smart, they will pay attention to those recommendations, and they will do everything they can to adhere to them, regardless of how many trips back to Dapper that it takes. My discomfort is in what happens between. And that's why I would like to see those recommendations, as I know they're spelled out, because I just got a letter from Scott, there you are, on the Chicago Avenue Legacy project. So I know that those are put on the website, but I think they get lost in the translation, so that for the process then is then defined by an up or down vote, here or there, not what staff is really saying. And if our staff is as wonderful as they are, and I absolutely believe that they are, they should also be concerned that their recommendations are getting lost in the shuffle here. And so those recommendations, in my view, should follow the application all the way to the end till it hits us at council, and we can have the DAPR recommendations, and we can have the final application, and we can compare, did you meet DAPR's recommendations? If the Plan Commission decides to do that or not, at least we will know about that, rather than being faced with an up or down vote. Because, again, I have sat through the Plan Commission meetings where I'm not actually in the room, I'm watching on television because I think that's my job as council liaison, to watch it, and I've been concerned. Now, the Plan Commission that Director Leonard served on was amazing. I mean, they were, wow, I mean, very, very impressive, and I mean, it was wonderful. That's not always the Plan Commission that we have. And so I'm struggling with how do we get a more consistent recommendation throughout the process, from DAPR all the way on up to us, with the public invested in understanding what it is that we're working with. And I think that's what the goal should be. I'm just trying to help, because I don't think the way things are traveling now reflects well on the process. So that's why I made the reference, and appreciate everybody's comments. And then, Director Leonard, I guess what I would ask is that we think about that and maybe figure out if there is something that can be adjusted. I don't need you to comment now, but something that can be adjusted if you think that would be helpful.
Well, with that direction, we can look and see what perhaps other communities handle. We have a sense of what neighboring communities do in regards to these things, but we can see what might be out there.
Great, thank you. All right, that's the end of our official agenda. Are there any communications? Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. And second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.